Here today with the chair of our board, Chief Derek Epp from Tiacto First Nation in British Columbia. Masicho to the Algonquin Anishinabe Nation for welcoming and hosting us on your territory this week. Thank you to the leadership in this room for all you do to support the progression of our First Nations and ensuring that we remain united. My name is Ernie Daniels. I'm Dene and a proud member of the Salt River First Nation in the Northwest Territories. I'm also President and CEO of the First Nations Finance Authority. I'm honored to stand before you today to not just share on the success of our First Nations for what they've been able to achieve by working with the FNFA, but also to share some perspectives on Canada's Budget 2025. While the budget didn't address many critical requirements of our nation, we remain optimistic and still see many opportunities that exist which we need to capitalize on. So who are we? Good question. FNFA became into existence in 1992 when a group of First Nation leaders envisioned a not-for-profit, Indigenous-owned and controlled financial institution. The intention is to provide all First Nations and Indigenous governments with the same financial instruments that other levels of government in Canada have at their disposal to build safe, healthy, and prosperous communities and tools to move away from the welfare-based economy. We are 100% First Nation-led. We are a not-for-profit organization operating under the First Nation Fiscal Management Act. All of our board members are elected First Nation leaders from communities we serve, and they provide guidance and oversight into everything we do. Before FNFA existed, First Nations were the only level of government in Canada without the access to capital markets. We changed that. And today, our nations have the ability to access the capital markets, and that's a very powerful tool. Today, nearly 400 First Nations have voluntarily joined the First Nation Fiscal Management Act, and more recently, we now have legislation coming into force to give self-governing nations the autonomy to also borrow from the First Nations Finance Authority. FNFA provides affordable financing, investment, and advisory services to nations who become scheduled and take the steps to work with us. As an example, FNFA's interim financing rate is 3.4%. Many of the nations represented in this room are members of the FNFA, and our goal is to continue empowering you to build your own futures on your own terms. Under the direction of our board, we are working to decolonize old, outdated structures with both proven and new innovative approaches to level the playing field between First Nations and the rest of Canada. We need to find ways to close the infrastructure gap that exists in our nations, and we will not and cannot rely on Canada to do this for us. Under the guidance of AFN, multiple comprehensive reports have now been released that quantify the infrastructure gap in our First Nations, now at a minimum of $350 billion. We also have evidence that investment into our nations results in a positive contribution to Canada and to Canada's GDP. Recently, FNFA passed a milestone where we have successfully raised over $4 billion through the capital markets for investments into nation-building projects, creating an estimated 39,000 jobs and creating close to $8.5 billion, not just for the Indigenous economy, but for Canada's economy. One of our principles is every loan tells a story, because they do. They make meaningful impacts in our nations. Some of the projects that we have financed are with the Haisla First Nation in the Cedar LNG project, valued at $1.4 billion equity, This gives the Haisla First Nation a 50.1% interest into Cedar LNG. Clearwater Seafoods, which has allowed for the return of the historical culture fishing rights with the Mi'kmaq, but has also allowed for 50% equity interest into North America's largest seafood company, Henvey Inlet First Nation wind farm, which has been transformational not just to Henvey Inlet, but to many communities around them, and is now providing clean energy to over 110,000 homes in southern Ontario. But we didn't get here overnight. In 2014, we issued our first bond, an FNFA bond, into the capital markets for $90 million. And without the leadership of our dedicated board of directors and the trust of the nations that we work with and our members, we would have not have access to $4 billion in financing. A pivotal achievement this past year was the successful refinancing of our inaugural 10-year bond that was issued in 2014, as well as issuing our first 30-year fixed-rate bond. A bond is a debt instrument that's used in the capital markets that's much like an IOU or a loan. A pivotal achievement this past year was the successful refinancing of this bond. We have now received 3 AA credit ratings, opinions from 3 different credit rating agencies. Because of all the safeguards we have in place, we have a very strong track record and have built a solid reputation with our institutional investors, which are global. For far too long, outdated, inequitable structures under the Indian Act have limited First Nations' ability to fully exercise self-determination. Access to affordable capital is critical for First Nations to advance their priorities and to help close the $350 billion infrastructure gap, and to participate into economic opportunities and create meaningful change in our communities. What the federal government must realize is when First Nations succeed, Canada succeeds, because investment in Indigenous communities strengthens our economy, creates jobs, and contributes to Canada's GDP in a positive way. Access to affordable capital is just not an economic tool. It's a foundation for the overall health and well-being of our nations. It creates the conditions for growth, innovation, and long-term success. Most importantly, it ensures that Indigenous communities are not left on the sidelines, but are active participants and leaders in shaping Canada's future. We are the only First Nation-led organization in the world leveraging private capital from the international markets through a pool borrowing model. Lots of money exists in this capital markets. I estimate it's around $400 trillion, and our nations have access to this through the FNFA. The results speak for themselves. The FNFA model works. Today we are watching First Nations become leaders in Canada's energy and resource economy on a global stage. While Budget 25 included positive opportunities for our communities to gain access to capital, we are also aware of the difficult cuts that will significantly impact our First Nations, and we need to continue to remain united and hold Canada to account for their fiduciary obligations. Budget 2025 brings forward investment opportunities that could open the door for new opportunities for our communities with actions like amendments to the First Nation Fiscal Management Act, which will allow the FNFA to finance Indigenous-owned special purpose vehicles, expanding access to affordable capital for major and economic resources. A special purpose vehicle, which is very familiar in our communities, limited corporations where a number of First Nations can work together. Canada also intends to explore a bid bonding and surety backstop pilot for our First Nation contractors, allowing our First Nation contractors located on reserve equitable access to bonding facilities. A backstop would address inequities due to Section 89 of the Indian Act, which currently prohibits the ability for contractors to execute a necessary indemnity agreement required to obtain bonding insurance without costly and equitable alternatives. This intention signals an understanding of the need to remove inequitable barriers which will create equitable conditions for First Nation business to scale and grow on parity with other Canadian businesses. Our small businesses are the backbone of our communities. Finally, Canada's mention to consider a monetization project for federal government transfers will unlock additional and much-needed funding for on-reserve infrastructure, which allows us to build more with today's dollar than tomorrow's dollar. Our nation should never have to wait 70 years to build a school. We need to do away with the pay-as-you-go system that Canada currently employs for funding infrastructure. This monetization plan, monetizing is just another word for amortizing over a period of time. This plan is a high impact, low cost, and will unleash Indigenous capital and investments rooted in true partnerships between the Canadian government and Indigenous rights and title holders. People often ask, why do I do this work? Well, the answer is really simple: to improve the quality of life for our people. These legislative changes could make a brighter, more prosperous future, not just for today, but for generations to come. While the FNFA is ready to work in true partnership with Canada to finalize the amendments and pilots, our main priority remains the same: to support the First Nations access to capital they need to build healthy and strong communities. And we would be happy to work and learn from priorities in your nations. If you would like to support us in these initiatives, we would welcome you to contact our office, look at our website. We do have support letters that are available. And now I'd like to turn the podium over to Chief Derek Epp, who's the chair of the First Nations Finance Authority.
Thanks, Ernie. Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I want to acknowledge all the chiefs, delegates, elders, proxies in the room, thanking you for allowing me to share a few words. I wasn't expecting to come up and speak, so I got a napkin of what I may or may not say. We'll see. But for those of you who don't know me, my traditional name is Wilalik. My given name is Derek Epp. I'm the chief of Chiactal, also known as Chiacton First Nation. We're about 100 kilometers east of Vancouver on the west coast, and very fortunate to be doing this for almost a decade now and following the footsteps of some amazing leaders that have really paved the path for me to do this work and be up here as the chairperson of the First Nations Finance Authority. And really what I want to share is some context to what Ernie just shared, some context to how these amendments actually will play out and how they make a big impact in access to capital and supporting First Nations' ability to become economically self-sufficient. First, I'll talk a bit about the SPVs, so special purpose vehicles, and the amendment to the First Nations Fiscal Management Act is so critical to being able to support the major infrastructure projects, whatever it may be across the country, and to be able to make sure that those revenues are staying in community. I'll give it a good example of one that just I was a part of for the last 2 years. Part of the negotiations team and now part of the board of Stan the Sec 8. We were able to actually negotiate and acquire 12.5% equity of the Enbridge liquid natural gas pipeline from BC to southern BC, and it became a $736 million acquisition, which with the expansion will be around a $1.5 billion acquisition. Now, what happened in this acquisition, because FNFA's legislation doesn't allow us to lend to special purpose vehicles, we had to go down the conventional way of utilizing banks and institutions to actually finalize this negotiation and the deal and the financing that came along with it. But what that means is we're paying above rates above what the FNFA can offer. And really what I enjoy doing in these deals is negotiating these deals so that we get as many funds staying in the communities as possible. Because we do know that our communities are reinvesting these funds in infrastructure and housing and health and wellness, whatever it may be that's your community's priorities. This deal brought together 38 communities in BC on one asset, which is unprecedented in BC alone and really sets the stage for future projects. But again, being able to utilize the competitive financing rates that the FNFA can offer is such an advantage because it means more revenue stay in communities. You know, I'm really proud that I can say in my community I have sidewalks on both sides of the streets. I have crosswalks. I have been able to build the infrastructure and bring in critical infrastructure to my community members is a direct result of working with the First Nations Fiscal Management Act and the Framework Agreement, and of course, being able to access lending through the First Nations Finance Authority. You know, and the bonding and surety is one that I think is, you know, will have a massive impact in a lot of our individual members' lives, especially. Being able to participate in federal and provincial contracts is something that will open a door and be able to scale businesses for our individual members like we've never seen before. I have a couple members who own businesses in my own community who, because of bonding and surety, they can't participate in the big contracts, the federal, provincial, municipal contracts. But doing this will enable them to be able to scale their companies to a different level. Last, and probably one of the most important, is the monetization. You know, as Ernie mentioned, $350 billion in infrastructure gap is massive. And being able to monetize these funds, and let's say we take $100 million and monetize that to $1 billion through the FNFA, we'll be able to provide infrastructure projects at a much more scalable and a faster pace so that our communities can begin to get that competitive edge. And I can say that from my experience. You know, the city of Chilliwack is not a massive municipality, about 100,000 people, and we've grown a lot over the last couple of years. But now, because my community, Chiacto, has been able to access business-grade infrastructure, we've become competitive in our municipality. So much so that we're actually now working with the city of Chilliwack on unlocking land through the addition to reserve process and working at actually being able to co-design what the city of Chilliwack is going to look like with public schools, with public recreation sites, housing, infrastructure, commercial sites, light industrial, whatever it may be. What's that enabled my community to do? It's created own source revenue. And we've gone from 15, 20 years ago of having 90% of our revenues dependent on federal transfers to 90% of our revenues now own source revenue, and 10% are federal flow-through funds. I will never say we're dependent on the federal government, and that's something that I'm really proud of. And I want to just, you know, leave you with that these tools that we're working on at the Finance Authority do make a difference, and your support is valued through these processes. And we do look to the chiefs and the delegates to make sure that we have your consent to move forward as well on these. And we hope that we can get your support, because, you know, I can say for a fact that my community has directly benefited from these tools that the Finance Authority has access to. And with these three big changes, it will open up further economic tools. So I just want to say thank you for allowing me to share. It's really good to see some familiar faces in the room, and really looking forward to continuing the dialogue with each of you over these next couple days, months, years, whatever it may be. We're here to talk, we're here to support, and we're here to be a resource to help your community continue to progress. So thank you for allowing me to share. Enjoy the rest of the couple days here, and I'm looking forward to meeting and working with each of you.